A whisper no one heard, except the one who never should have. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axen. Let's hear from you. Where in the world are you listening from today? It always brightens my day to read your comments. Now, let's begin. It was a Tuesday, and I'd just finished alphabetizing Wolfe's backlogged correspondence from the preceding 10 years, which tells you exactly how stimulating the day had been. The only real excitement had been deciding whether to order lamb or duck for dinner. I'd leaned lamb. Fritz had nodded solemnly. Wolfe hadn't looked up from the orchids. That all changed at 2:47 p.m. when the bell rang and a woman stepped into the brownstone with a whisper on her lips and murder behind her eyes, metaphorically anyway. Or so I thought at the time. She was tall, 30-something, and wrapped in a coat that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her gloves were leather. Her hair was pinned like she'd escaped a Renoir. And her voice was the kind you don't forget even if you try. Soft, cultured, and just trembly enough to make you think she was either terrified or very good at pretending. "I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe," she said. Not asked, said, command with a velvet lining. I gave her the standard spiel about consultations and schedules, all the while keeping an eye on the way she held her handbag tight to her chest, like it might bite. She interrupted me halfway through. "My name is Sibylla Stone. I believe he'll want to hear what I have to say." Now Wolfe generally takes unannounced visitors the way a cat takes to a thunderstorm, with disdain and an immediate desire to flee. Only he doesn't flee, he just digs in deeper. But something about her tone, or maybe the name, made me lean toward the intercom. I pressed the button. "Yes?" Wolfe's voice rumbled through like distant thunder. "There's a Miss Sibylla Stone here to see you." Silence. Then, "Bring her." Now that was unusual. Wolfe hadn't voluntarily met with a stranger in the middle of his orchid time since the Great Cheese incident of 2009. Don't ask. Sibylla followed me into the office like she'd been there before. She hadn't, I'd have remembered. Wolfe didn't stand, obviously, but his eyes did a sweep that told me his brain had already filed her under something more than potential nuisance. He didn't offer her a seat, which meant she was going to have to work for it. She didn't blink. "There's a man staying in my guest house who isn't who he says he is," she said. "And I think he's listening through the curtains." Wolfe squinted, then leaned back, just slightly, in his chair. "Explain." "I rent the downstairs apartment of my home in Astoria. It's a converted brownstone. Ironic, I know. The man who moved in last month said he was a traveling pianist. Quiet, respectful, paid in cash. Except last Thursday I came home early and heard voices behind the curtains in my parlor." "Voices?" Wolfe echoed. She nodded. "One voice, actually. Whispering. In my voice. A recording. That got even my attention." I glanced at Wolfe, but he was looking at her like she was a cipher he'd just started solving. "And you believe this? Guest is responsible." "I do, but that's not why I'm here." "Why are you here, Miss Stone?" Wolfe asked, voice like cold broth, clear and unimpressed. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a torn piece of thick ivory stationery. One corner had been burned. The rest bore the elegant calligraphy of a name I hadn't heard in years, but hadn't forgotten either. Wolfe saw it. His lips pressed together. "I found this in the fireplace last night," she said. "It was addressed to your late client, Mr. Leopold Trigg." That did it. Wolfe sat forward half an inch, which for him is the emotional equivalent of a standing ovation. Leopold Trigg had been a Wall Street whistleblower turned recluse, turned corpse. Under Wolfe's client list, and buried with more secrets than a Vatican filing cabinet, his case had been closed, clean, and buried. So why was his name burned into the corner of a paper found in the apartment of a man who didn't exist, beneath a woman who claimed her own voice was whispering behind the curtains? Wolfe waved toward the red chair. "Sit, Miss Stone." She did. I got her a glass of water. And just like that, the air in the brownstone shifted. Wolfe had taken the bait. Only I wasn't sure what the hook was, or who'd laid the line. I'd seen a lot of odd fish pass through the doors of the brownstone, but Sibylla Stone had the peculiar advantage of being both unnerved and completely composed. She sat there like she'd rehearsed this moment, like it had kept her up at night and she'd finally stepped into a script she'd been memorizing in secret. Wolfe, naturally, detested scripts, but he was watching her with a patience he usually reserved for ham hock broth. "You were acquainted with Mr. Trigg?" he asked. No inflection. "No," she said, "but I know he was your client." "That paper," she gestured to the torn, singed square on Wolfe's desk, "was in my fireplace, barely charred. I recognized your name in the margin, handwritten." Wolfe didn't glance at the paper again. Once was enough for him. "You presume it came from your tenant?" "I don't presume," she said, sitting straighter. "But I can tell you that 2 days ago someone tried to open the door connecting my unit to the basement. It hasn't been used in years. I bolted it. But someone knew it was there. I was perched in my usual chair, halfway between bodyguard and stenographer, and I'll admit I was starting to believe her. That's a rare condition for me, and strangers with expensive handbags. But the paper was real, the name was real, and Wolfe was interested. He tapped the edge of the desk with one blunt finger. "Describe the man." She did. "Name: Adrian Lamb. Age: early 40s, medium height, lean, with hands that didn't look like they'd ever seen piano wire. Claimed to play in small hotel lounges upstate, wore a wristwatch with no numbers, just a blank silver face, like peppermint tea." "Where did he say he was from?" Wolfe asked. "Philadelphia. But the accent doesn't match." I could have said that 10 minutes ago, but Wolfe prefers letting the patient finish their recital before he writes the prescription. "Your decision to come to me," he said, "was prompted by the paper, not the voice." "Yes." "Why?" She hesitated. Wolfe leaned back, folding his arms. "Because I thought I'd gone crazy," she said finally. The whisper. "I thought maybe I was imagining it. But the paper is real. Someone has been in my home." Wolfe's eyes closed. For a moment I thought he'd dropped off, but no, he was processing. That kind of stillness meant he was reassembling the whole affair in his head, piece by piece, as if putting together an unfamiliar chessboard from a box someone else had packed in the dark. "You have not contacted the police?" "No. I thought they'd dismiss me." "You are probably correct." She looked relieved, which should have worried me more than it did. He opened his eyes and gestured faintly in my direction. "Archie will accompany you home and inspect the premises. He will speak to this Mr. Lamb." That was my cue. I stood. "Miss Stone, shall—" She didn't thank Wolfe. Most clients do. Instead, she gave him a long look, like she knew something he didn't, which is dangerous territory in that room, and followed me out. On the street, she was quiet until we reached the curb, and I unlocked the sedan. "Does he always do that?" she asked, as I slid behind the wheel. "Do what? Accept something before he knows what it is?" "No," I said. "He usually refuses it even after he knows what it is, so consider yourself lucky. Or not." She gave a tight smile. "You don't believe me?" "I don't believe much," I said. "But you got Wolfe to lean forward in his chair during orchid time. That's a small miracle. So either you're telling the truth, or you're a very gifted liar, which, by the way, he'll find out sooner or later." She said nothing the rest of the ride. Her building in Astoria was the kind of converted pre-war place that realtors describe as charming with potential, which is code for some parts may collapse under weather stress. Her unit was upstairs, and the tenant's door was below, a floor down and tucked beneath the main staircase. "I haven't been down there since Sunday," she said as we stepped into the hallway. "The lights flicker, and the buzzer hasn't worked in months." "That's fine. I knock old-fashioned," I said. Lamb's door was painted a dull green. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Nothing. I turned to her. "You said he's usually in at this hour?" "He should be. He said he practices late mornings and sleeps after lunch." I glanced down at the doormat. It hadn't been stepped on recently. No dust shift, no stray leaves, no crushed grit. but a faint whiff of something herbal clung to the air. Not peppermint, chamomile. I tried the knob. Locked. I'm going to need to see inside, I said. I'm the landlord, she said quickly. Technically, it's still my property. I didn't push further. She produced a key from her purse and unlocked the door. Inside, the place was neat. Too neat. One chair by the window, one bed, one bookshelf, and a table with a chipped saucer holding a dried-out tea bag. Everything was symmetrical, clean, and faintly false. Like a stage set, I moved slowly through the rooms. No dust on the piano keys, so he had touched it, but no sheet music, no metronome, no notebooks, just an old upright and silence. In the bedroom closet, clothes that looked worn but not lived in. A suitcase beneath the bed held only shoes, 3 pairs, all the same brand, different sizes. I checked the bathroom. Nothing out of the ordinary, until I spotted a roll of film on the windowsill. Unlabeled. I picked it up. Did he have a camera? I asked. No. Not that I've seen. I pocketed it. Back in the living room, something was off. I felt it before I saw it. The curtains, heavy velvet, wrong for a rental, and the back side, facing the room, had a small square slit near the hem. A hole. I crouched and looked. Behind it, taped to the wall, was a microphone. It wasn't active, just mounted, carefully, quietly. What in the hell? I muttered. Sibella stared at it like it had grown fangs. I knew it. I didn't answer. I was already calculating how long Wolfe had suspected this wasn't just a landlord-tenant dispute back at the brownstone. I gave Wolfe the film canister and described the microphone. He listened, unmoving. His fingers tented. I presume he has not returned. Not as of when we left. Want me to stake out the place? No. He will not return. Not yet. He has accomplished what he intended for the moment, which was to prompt Miss Stone to come here. That stopped me. You think he wanted her to bring this to you? Wolfe didn't answer. He picked up the burned stationery again, holding it like it was someone's molar. Fine soul, he said. Send him to the tenant's known haunts, hotels, piano lounges, watch Miss Stone's building, and have the film develop. Think it is surveillance? I think, Wolfe said, placing the paper flat against the blotter, that we are not dealing with a pianist. We are dealing with someone who wanted me to hear a whisper. He looked up, and someone else who never wanted me to hear it at all. I went to call Saul. My instincts told me something was moving fast under the surface and we were just hearing the beginning of it. The next morning dawned with a sky the color of cold oatmeal, which didn't improve my mood. I'd spent half the night wondering what sort of pianist collected microphones in empty suitcases, and why someone who liked peppermint tea had a cupboard stocked with nothing but chamomile. By the time I'd made it back to the brownstone with Fritz's eggs inside me and caffeine doing its rounds, Saul had already reported in. Wolfe didn't bother asking me to sit. He just told me to listen. Always a good start. Lamb's name isn't Lamb, Wolfe said. No surprise, Saul found no trace of him in hotel lounge circles, nor among union musicians. The suitcase brand is bespoke, imported, German. The shoes were real but purchased under a different name from a boutique in Hoboken. Spook? I asked. Government? Possibly, or someone impersonating one. And the film? I pulled the envelope from my inside pocket and slid it across Wolfe's desk. It had come back from our regular developer in Midtown, who knew better than to ask why Nero Wolfe wanted old-fashioned analog prints in a digital world. Wolfe took the envelope, slit it open with the little silver blade he kept for mail, and withdrew a small stack of glossy photographs. He looked at them one by one silently, while I waited and tried not to fidget. The third photo made him stop. He held it longer than the others, his expression not changing, but his eyes tightening, just enough to tell me he'd just seen something that made a piece click into place. He turned the photograph and slid it across the desk. It was of a window. Sibella's window, shot from outside, across the street. Telephoto lens. You could just make out her silhouette behind the curtain. Creepy, I muttered. Wolfe said nothing. He went through the rest of the stack. More photos, all from the same vantage. All of Sabella. Different days, different light, same angle. Surveillance, pure and simple. No indication of when or by whom, but enough to make any reasonable person's skin crawl. I cleared my throat. That makes her a target, not a liar. She didn't know she was being watched. She knew something, Wolfe said, but not everything, which makes her dangerous. To someone. You thinking blackmail, too indirect. This is more evaluative. He was studying her, testing her behavior, her reaction. To what? That, Wolfe said, pointing to the paper with Leopold Trigg's name on it, is what we are here to determine. We were interrupted by the front bell. Wolfe didn't flinch. I got up and went to the door, opened it, and immediately recognized the kind of man who only knocks when he knows you'll be home. He was tall, stiff, and pale, with a haircut you could set a ruler to and shoes that hadn't met scuff since the Eisenhower administration. He had a badge under his coat before I even asked. Archie Goodwin? He asked. I'm Special Agent Noel Krell, Department of Justice. I'd like a word with Mr. Wolfe. He said it like was optional. I took a long look at him, decided he wasn't carrying anything illegal or particularly interesting, and stepped back. Come in. Wipe your shoes. Fritz just waxed. He did, grudgingly, and followed me into the office, like a man being led to a firing squad. He was confident he could sue afterward. Wolfe didn't stand. Mr. Krell, he said. You are expected. That took some of the starch out of Krell's shoulders. I'm here, Krell said, in relation to a case involving a missing internal file connected to a former whistleblower. You may have represented Leopold Trigg. Wolfe gestured to the red chair. Krell didn't sit. I'm not here officially, he said. Not yet, but certain concerns have arisen. Specifically, your name has appeared on a document recently recovered from a fire-damaged apartment in Queens. I raised an eyebrow. Wolfe didn't blink. You're referring, Wolfe said, to Miss Sabella Stone's property. Krell's face shifted just enough to confirm it. She came to you? He asked. She did. With a very particular whisper. Krell glanced at me, then back at Wolfe. Then I assume you know the file Trigg kept on Project Cairn is still missing. That was news. Wolfe, damn him, already knew. I suspected as much, Wolfe said. You believe it was in Miss Stone's possession. We believe someone believes it was, or is, and that someone sent Mr. Lamb, if that is his name. Krell's jaw flexed. We have no record of him. That told us what we needed. Lamb wasn't government. He was either a contractor, a freelancer, or more dangerously part of something unsanctioned but well-funded. May I speak with Miss Stone? Krell asked. No, Wolfe said. Krell blinked. Excuse me? She is under my protection. You may file a request, deliver it through official channels, and await a scheduled appointment. Until then, I suggest you remain cordial. Krell looked like he was going to explode, but he didn't. Instead, he rose. He'd never sat and left without another word. I followed him out, shut the door behind him, and came back in. You're making friends, I said. Poirot. That man could not find a whisper in a library. So what now? Wolfe turned toward the window, where the June light was filtering through slats like gold dust. Now, he said, we find out why Miss Stone's name is in Trigg's files, and why a man who doesn't exist was hired to impersonate a musician in her home. You think she's the connection? I think, Wolfe said slowly, she was meant to become the connection. I let that hang for a moment. You mean someone arranged this whole thing just to get you involved? Precisely. I let out a low whistle. Well, you always wanted a fan club. He scowled. Ah, find Lon Cohen. I want to know everything that's been written about Sabella Stone and Leopold Trigg in the last 5 years. Every lawsuit, every board appointment, every foundation and trust. Follow the trail of names. Anything specific I should ask for? Yes, Wolfe said. Ask who benefits if Trigg's file on Project Cairn stays missing forever. I went for the phone, and Wolfe reached for the bell to summon Fritz. He needed beer. I needed answers, and someone somewhere was waiting behind a curtain, listening to every word. Lon Cohen called me back just after lunch. I'd barely finished a corned beef sandwich from Roney's on 11th. Good meat, bad mustard when the phone rang. Wolfe gestured for silence and continued murdering a plate of braised oxtail while I took the call in the front room. Lon sounded like he'd skipped breakfast and was running on fumes and resentment. "I've been digging," he said, "and what you're working on is hotter than it looks." I thought it already looked hot. Wolfe was in his chair when we returned. Naturally, beer beside him, orchids in bloom behind him. Fritz hovered at the edge of the dining room, waiting to see if this was going to turn into one of those days when dinner got cold. I handed Wolfe the envelope. He opened it, withdrew the pages, and read the first two in silence. Then he stopped, set them down with surprising delicacy, and looked at Sybil. "You understand, Miss Stone," he said, "that the contents of this envelope constitute a live wire. Possession alone makes you a threat." She met his eyes. "I didn't ask for it. No one ever asks for responsibility. It is inherited, like dust or disease." I made a sound in my throat. "You think Trigg knew she'd find this? He designed it for her to find. Eventually. But he expected her to have time. Time to gain allies. Or understanding. That she did not is his error. Or someone's intervention." Sibella sat in the red chair, her voice smaller than before. "I think my father knew he was going to die. He started burning old files, shredding correspondence. He stopped going into the office. He changed the locks on the study. One day he told me never to trust anyone who asked about birds." I blinked. "Birds?" "Specifically, finches," Wolfe grunted. "A code phrase, common in Cold War tradecraft. Likely a marker for operatives familiar with the file's existence. Blue finch. In this context is the label assigned to the fragment. It means this folder could trigger a cascade of identification if decoded, hence the surveillance, hence Lamb." "He wasn't just listening," I said. "He was waiting to see if the Bluefinch fragment surfaced." "We must assume," Wolfe said slowly, "that Miss Stone is being watched now more than ever. You will return to her apartment, Archie, but not with her. She will remain here tonight." "And now it has," Wolfe said. Silence. Again. Wolfe stared down at the pages as if they'd insulted his sensibilities. Then he rang for Fritz and ordered beer. I opened a bottle for him and handed it over. She tensed. "Is that really necessary?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "It is necessary because the people looking for this document will no longer be subtle. You think they'll come after me? You really think they'll break into her place again?" "I think," Wolfe said, "they already are." I escorted Sibella to the guest room on the 3rd floor and gave her the rundown. "Stay in. No calls, no internet." We were officially a Cold War bunker again. When I came back down, Wolfe was already dictating a list to Saul over the phone: names, associations, project ties. I waited until he hung up. "No," Wolfe said. "They'll burn it, or remove it from the inside out. Your presence will confirm whether that is already underway." "Got it." He handed me the envelope. "Leave this in the wall safe before you go. And Archie, if you see Lamb again, do not engage." I left just before sundown. The air had turned humid, clinging like a second shirt, and I didn't like how quiet her street had become. Too perfect, too clean. Not a soul on the stoop, no kids shouting, no one smoking by the trash bins. Even the corner cat had vanished. What? Not even verbally. Especially not verbally. He is a man who harvests reactions. We cannot afford to feed him. I let myself into her unit. Everything looked undisturbed at first, but 10 minutes in, I found a subtle clue Wolfe would have spotted immediately. Her framed photo of her father on the bookshelf was half an inch out of place. The dust along the edge was broken. Someone had picked it up and set it back down. but in a rush, I checked the rest of the unit. The curtain rod brackets were gone. Not just empty, the screws had been removed, filled with putty, painted over. That wasn't just someone coming in to look. That was someone checking if something else was behind it, or had been. Someone was erasing. And that meant one thing. They believed whatever had been hidden here was already gone. Back at the brownstone, I gave Wolfe the update. He took it with his usual stillness, then simply said us. Then Leopold Trigg was onto something before he died. Everyone assumed it was internal graft. Big stuff, sure, but not front page. Project Cairn wasn't even named until after he was in the ground. Then the Doge locked it down so hard I had to ask 3 different favors just to confirm it exists. Start with Cairn, I said. What was it? A covert finance pipeline. Black budget, funds re-rated through humanitarian shells. It was designed for deniable operations, foreign and domestic. But Trigg found out someone was laundering through the shell foundations for private interests. Billion. Names? Too early. But get this, one of the foundations involved was the Stone Alton Foundation. Sabella's father was a co-founder, died in a boating accident 10 years ago. She inherited a controlling share. The Stone name was scrubbed from most records after Trigg died. Someone's been cleaning house. The Stone name was scrubbed from most records after Trigg died. Someone's been cleaning house. Was she directly involved? Not that I can find. But Trigg mentioned her name in a memo, just once. It wasn't about her. It was a warning. If Stone's daughter starts asking questions, make sure someone else answers them. That landed like a punch. Wolfe had been right again. What about Trigg's file, I asked. Project Cairn, was it real? Still missing, completely vanished. Trigg had backup caches, but none have surfaced. If it still exists, it's with someone who's either smarter than the Doge or crazier. Or both, I said. Lon chuckled without humor. Archie, you want my advice? Drop this. I've seen careers vanish for less. People too. Be careful. He hung up. I went back to the office. Wolfe was mid-sip on his second bottle of Löwenbräu. Eyes half-lidded but fully awake. Well, he asked. She's connected. All right. Through her father. The Stone Alton Foundation was one of the financial shells Trigg was tracking. Her name popped up in a buried memo. He was warning someone to mislead her if she started poking around. Wolfe nodded once, as if confirming a private theory. Then she's not bait. She's the fuse. Someone planted Lamb to monitor her, to see whether she might ignite. And now, by coming here, which makes her more dangerous. To the person who sent Lamb. Yes. I sank into the red chair. So let's say this. Trigg hid the Cairn file. Someone thinks Sabella might know where. Lamb shows up to test her, see if she cracks. When she doesn't, he leaves a breadcrumb, burned paper with Trigg's name, and she runs to us. Now we're in it. Yes, Wolfe said, almost lazily. Now we... Just then, the doorbell rang. It was 3 o'clock. I answered. Sabella Stone stood there paler than before, in a coat too heavy for June and eyes that didn't match her lipstick anymore. They broke into my apartment, she said. I stepped aside and let her in. In the office, she recounted the events in clipped, rattled sentences. She'd gone out that morning to a library in Jackson Heights. When she returned, the lock was jammed. Nothing appeared stolen, but the velvet curtain was gone, and so was the mounted microphone. Wolfe said nothing, just tapped the armrest of his chair. I told no one about that curtain, she said. Not even my building manager. And it was cut out, sliced clean across the rod. They left anything? I asked. She nodded, opened her purse, and produced a square of thick white card. I took it. Printed in block letters were 3 words: "Let sleeping files lie." I passed it to Wolfe. He looked at it without touching it, then looked at her. "You understand now," he said. "You are not a bystander." Her mouth twisted. "I didn't ask for any of this." "No, but you inherited it. Silence. I want to know who this man really is, she said. Adrian Lamb, if that's even his name. I want to know why he came into my life. I want to know what they think I know. Wolfe closed his eyes. You know now what you are meant to know. Someone has made you the center of a very deliberate vortex. Your name connects the past to the present, and your presence here has drawn me in. Therefore, I must assume that whoever left that card did so in full knowledge of your association with me. Someone wanted me to come to you. Yes, or wanted you frightened away from me. But too late. I said they're trying to flush something out. If they're hitting you and leaving warnings, they're scared of what you might find. Or remember, Wolfe opened his eyes. Tell me, Miss Stone, what did your father hide from you? She blinked. I don't know. No. But you suspect. Her hands gripped the edge of her chair. He used to say strange things, paranoid. Like paper lies, 7, but ink never forgets. He said it whenever I asked about his work with the foundation. And once, just before he died, he told me, if you ever feel watched, go to the one who never moves. I didn't know what it meant. I turned to Wolfe. That you? He didn't answer, but the set of his mouth told me he thought so. She added, and there was one more thing. I found it in an old edition of the Federalist Papers. He kept it in his study. She reached into her purse again and pulled out a slim sheet of paper, folded neatly. I opened it. It was a page of typescript, headed with Appendix C, distribution markers, modified entity labels. A list of abbreviations followed strings of letters and numbers that looked like gibberish, but something about it felt weighted. Beneath that, scrawled in ink, were 3 words, Blue Finch folder. I passed it to Wolfe. He examined it carefully. You've had this long? He asked. Years, she said. I never knew what it meant. Now Wolfe leaned forward, not dramatically, not enough to mess with gravity, but enough for me to know we were now officially in deep water. Miss Stone, he said, your father was aware of Project Cairn before it was dismantled. He left you this as an anchor, not a clue, but someone else believes it is a clue to the location of the missing file. And that's what Lamb was after. Yes, but he wasn't there to find it. He was there to watch, to see if you would find it or reveal it. I asked, so what's the Blue Finch folder? Wolfe closed his eyes again. That, Archie, is what you are going to discover. I stood. How? Find the original copy of the Federalist Papers she referenced. The book, the edition. See what her father hid in the binding, in the margins, in the pages. He would not have entrusted her with this if he hadn't hidden something else in plain sight. I nodded and turned to her. Still have it? Yes, she said. I never threw it out. Then I'm coming with you. She hesitated. You think it's safe? No, I said. But nothing is anymore. Wolfe called after me as I stepped out. Archie. Yeah. Do not take the subway, and do not let her out of your sight. That was his way of saying the game had changed. And now, we were hunting something no one wanted found. Sabella's apartment looked different, this time not in layout or decoration but in atmosphere. Something had shifted. The air felt like it was holding its breath, the kind of silence you don't notice until you've already stepped too far into it. I swept the living room, bedroom, and kitchen without saying much, and she followed me from room to room like someone trailing their own shadow. The Federalist Papers volume was easy enough to find. It was shelved between The Quiet American and The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. If you're looking to hide something, subtle irony is as good a choice as any. She pulled the volume down and handed it to me. The cover was cracked leather, dark blue, with gold embossed lettering. A 1950s edition. Heavy, too heavy. I flipped it open. No inscriptions, no handwritten notes on the end papers, but the binding had bulk in the center, like the spine had been hollowed and something slipped in behind the signatures. I thumbed carefully through the chapters, past Hamilton and Madison, until I found the page where the book stopped resisting. Pages 94 and 95 were fused ever so slightly along the inner edge. "I need a blade," I said. She got a letter opener from a drawer. I worked it gently into the seam, split the pages, and something slid out. A slim envelope, hand-sealed, brittle from age. I turned it over. No label, no stamp, just 3 words written in neat black ink. Blue Finch folder. Inside were 6 more typed pages, single-spaced, the kind of old-style courier that could have come off a manual Olympia. It wasn't the original Cairn file, but it was definitely a piece of it. Each page was marked "Distribution Eyes Only," and the content wasn't gibberish. Code names, contract routes, dummy shell companies. 2 of them I recognized from Lon's list. Another I remembered from a piece Wolfe had once dissected with surgical precision in a congressional subcommittee hearing. He'd read a redacted memo aloud and told the chairman which phrases had been blacked out by someone who'd never read Latin. Sabella hovered behind me. "What is it?" "Leverage," I said, "and a very good reason for someone to make you disappear." She didn't flinch. That told me she was more than just a woman with a suspicious tenant. She was already part of the machinery. She just hadn't realized yet that she'd inherited a ticking gear. I slid the papers back into the envelope and tucked it into my inner pocket. "We're going to Wolfe," I said. "Nah." She locked up behind us. I scanned the street before we stepped outside. No black sedans, no loitering photographers, no peppermint scent hanging in the air. Still, I didn't relax. The ride back to the brownstone was tight and quiet. She sat stiffly, eyes on the passing buildings, and I could see the internal arithmetic playing behind her lashes. How had she become the epicenter? What else had her father buried in her life without her knowing? Wolfe was in his chair when we returned. Naturally. Beer beside him, orchids in bloom behind him. Fritz hovered at the edge of the dining room, waiting to see if this was going to turn into one of those days when dinner got cold. I handed Wolfe the envelope. He opened it, withdrew the pages, and read the first 2 in silence. Then he stopped, set them down with surprising delicacy, and looked at Sabella. "You understand, Miss Stone," he said, "that the contents of this envelope constitute a live wire. Possession alone makes you a threat." She met his eyes. "I didn't ask for it. No one ever asks for responsibility. It is inherited, like dust or disease." I made a sound in my throat. "You think Trigg knew she'd find this?" "He designed it for her to find. Eventually. But he expected her to have time. Time to gain allies, or understanding. That she did not is his error, or someone's intervention." Sabella sat in the red chair, her voice smaller than before. "I think my father knew he was going to die. He started burning old files, shredding correspondence. He stopped going into the office. He changed the locks on the study. One day he told me never to trust anyone who asked about birds." I blinked. "Birds?" "Specifically, finches." Wolfe grunted. "A code phrase. Common in Cold War tradecraft. Likely a marker for operatives familiar with the file's existence. Blue Finch, in this context, is the label assigned to the fragment. It means this folder could trigger a cascade of identification if decoded, hence the surveillance, hence Lamb." "He wasn't just listening," I said. "He was waiting to see if the Blue Finch fragment surfaced. And now it has," Wolfe said. Silence again. Wolfe stared down at the pages, as if they'd insulted his sensibilities. Then he rang for Fritz and ordered beer. I opened a bottle for him and handed it over. "We must assume," Wolfe said slowly, "that Miss Stone is being watched, now more than ever. You will return to her apartment, Archie, but not with her. She will remain here tonight." She tensed. "Is that really necessary?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "It is necessary, because the people looking for this document will no longer be subtle. You think they'll come after me?" "I think," Wolfe said, "they already are." I escorted Sabella to the guest room on the 3rd floor and gave her the rundown. Stay in, no calls, no internet. We were officially a Cold War bunker again. When I came back down, Wolfe was already dictating a list to Saul over the phone. Names, Associations, project ties. I waited until he hung up. You really think they'll break into her place again? No, Wolfe said. They'll burn it, or remove it from the inside out. Your presence will confirm whether that is already underway. Got it. He handed me the envelope. Leave this in the wall safe before you go. And Archie, if you see Lamb again, do not engage. What? Not even verbally. Especially not verbally. He is a man who harvests reactions. We cannot afford to feed him. I left just before sundown. The air had turned humid, clinging like a second shirt, and I didn't like how quiet her street had become. Too perfect, too clean. Not a soul on the stoop. No kids shouting, no one smoking by the trash bins. Even the corner cat had vanished. I let myself into her unit. Everything looked undisturbed at first, but 10 minutes in, I found a subtle clue. Wolfe would have spotted immediately. Her framed photo of her father on the bookshelf was half an inch out of place. The dust along the edge was broken. Someone had picked it up and set it back down, but in a rush. That wasn't just someone coming in to look. That was someone checking if something else was behind it, or had been. I checked the rest of the unit. The curtain rod brackets were gone. Not just empty. The screws had been removed, filled with putty, painted over. Someone was erasing. And that meant one thing. They believed whatever had been hidden here was already gone. Back at the brownstone, I gave Wolfe the update. He took it with his usual stillness, then simply said, "Good. We have flushed the hand that held the brush. Now let us see what portrait they feared being painted." He leaned back, tapped the envelope's label one last time. Blue Finch folder. And added, more to himself than me. The whisper behind the curtain was never meant to be heard. But now, it will be answered. It was 10:30 when Wolfe summoned me back to the office. I'd just come in from a sweep of Sabella's block, nothing fresh, just an idling delivery van. 3 houses down that I made a mental note of, and was halfway into a cold ginger ale when the bell rang. Wolfe was seated with the envelope on his desk, his fingers steepled in that way that says, "Interrupt me and I'll feed you to Fritz. Medium rare." He didn't look up when I entered. "We are now under pressure," he said. "You will call Saul. He is to find Adrian Lamb." "I thought you said not to engage him." "I said you were not to engage him. Saul will observe, quietly, discreetly. He is to report movement, contact, and especially if Lamb attempts to leave the city." I nodded and reached for the phone. But Wolfe continued, "And Archie, have Fred and Ari ready." That told me things were serious. Wolfe rarely deployed the full trio, unless the air was starting to smell like smoke. I placed the calls. Saul didn't ask questions, Fred said. Got it before I finished the sentence, and Ori grumbled about a date, but agreed with a heavy sigh that made me think the date probably wasn't going well anyway. When I came back in, Wolfe was staring out the window, unseeing. "Miss Stone is asleep?" he asked. "As much as anyone sleeps when their life is a game of hot potato with state secrets. She has composure," Wolfe said. "Inherited, perhaps. You think she knows more than she's letting on. I think she suspects more than she realizes. Her instinct to come here, whether planted or not, suggests a psychological resistance to manipulation. Then Lamb picked the wrong target." Or, Wolfe said, "She was not the target at all." That was a Wolfe sentence, which means it sounded like it answered something, but actually just blew open a trap door under the question. "You're thinking Trig." "I'm thinking," Wolfe said slowly, "about the point of contact. Consider the circumstances. Trig dies under suspicion, his file vanishes, and his final warning references Miss Stone. A decade passes, then a man arrives with a microphone and a motive. He plants evidence. But why now? I considered it. Something changed. Precisely. Something or someone has reactivated this file. The Blue Finch fragment has come alive again, which means the phone rang. I picked it up. "Archie," said Saul's voice, low and flat. "I've got him." My heart thumped. "Lamb? He's in a diner on 9th Avenue. Not hiding. In fact, I think he's waiting." "For who?" For you. That one word carried enough weight to crack the floorboards. You sure? I watched him take out a piece of paper, look at his watch, and fold it into an envelope. Then he asked the waitress if she knew when the delivery man was arriving. Wolfe was watching me now. Tell Wolfe, Saul added. This is bait. Big, shiny bait. I hung up and relayed it. Wolfe didn't blink. He is accelerating the timetable, he said. He wants to force us into a move. Very well. You want me to go? Yes. I raised my eyebrows. With what orders? Wolfe's voice sharpened. You are to sit across from him. Say nothing of importance. Observe. Report. Do not answer questions. Do not challenge him. Let him play the tune, and we shall see what instrument he thinks you are. 10 minutes later, I was seated across from Adrian Lamb, in a grimy booth at the kind of diner where the waitresses wear orthopedic shoes and call you on. He was as Sabella had described. Medium height, clean-shaven, symmetrical in a way that made your brain slide off the details. The kind of man you'd forget was in the room until he asked for the check. He smiled as I sat down. Mr. Goodwin. Finally. I didn't answer. Wolves rules. He folded his hands. You found it, of course. The Finch. That was the point. You always find things, don't you? Still nothing from me. Mrs. Stone is safe. I gave him a long look. He smiled wider. Safe enough to bring the document here then. Good. Good. He took out a photograph from his coat. Slid it across. It was a picture of Wolfe, in the plant room, watering orchids. The angle was from the skylight. He waited for my reaction. I leaned back, said nothing. You see, Mr. Goodwin, this isn't about you. Or her. It never was. It's about what happens after. That file is too heavy to carry for long. You're going to pass it, or hide it, or use it. His voice lowered. But you won't destroy it. That was the first accurate thing he'd said. He tapped the photo. There's a sequence in motion. You're not the only ones with access anymore. The moment the Finch was retrieved, 3 others were notified. Trigg made copies, distributed them to former colleagues. Prove it, I said, breaking Wolfe's rule. Lamb smiled again. No, but you'll know soon enough, because one of them is already dead. Shot in his hotel room in Brussels last week. Quiet story. Buried on page 12. He stood up. This isn't a threat, Mr. Goodwin. It's an opportunity. Deliver the Finch to its proper place, and no one gets hurt. Keep it, and someone will. He slid out of the booth and walked away. I waited 30 seconds, then exited through the back and called Wolfe from a payphone. I gave him the full report. He was quiet for a long time. Then, return. Now. The trap has been baited. I got back in time for Fritz's roast duck. Wolfe didn't eat much. He was thinking too hard. He made the mistake, he said, of showing the photograph. Why? Because it proves this is larger than Master Stone. It proves they're watching me, which means they're afraid. And when people are afraid, I said, they get sloppy. Exactly. He tapped the edge of the desk. Tomorrow morning, we will invite our guests. I frowned. Which guests? All of them. He leaned back in his chair. The girl who inherited a secret, the man who tried to erase it, the agent who wanted to bury it again, and whoever else comes knocking when the Finch sings. I knew that tone. It meant the stage was being set, and Wolfe had just taken his seat at the center of it. By 9:30 the next morning, the office was arranged with the precision of a firing squad. Wolfe sat behind his desk, immobile as a courthouse gargoyle. The envelope-marked blue Finch folder rested in front of him, untouched but visible. The chairs had been placed in a semicircle opposite him, red, yellow, and green. Our usual interrogation palette, like a sadistic traffic light. Fritz had dusted. I'd drawn the blinds just enough to let the light slant across the desk like stage lighting. And Wolfe, beer within reach and mind calibrated to ruin someone's day, waited. At 10 o'clock sharp, our guests began arriving. First came Special Agent Noel Krell, the Department of Justice stooge with the starched collar and the personality of wet sandpaper. He stepped into the room as if someone had dared him to. His eyes went straight to the envelope on Wolfe's desk, and for a second I thought he might reach for it. He didn't. Next came Sibylla Stone. I told her last night what to expect. A room full of people who might or might not want her dead. She wore a gray suit and a darker expression. Still elegant, still composed, but the cornered look in her eyes told me she'd realized she was in the middle of something far larger than personal inheritance. She nodded to Wolfe, but didn't speak. He nodded back barely. And then came Adrian Lamb. He strolled in like he'd been invited to Sunday lunch. No coat, no briefcase, no visible weapon, but a smile just as dangerous. Saul had followed him discreetly all morning, and we knew he hadn't made contact with anyone. Whatever Lamb was playing, he was playing solo now. He sat without asking. Wolfe waited for the silence to settle like dust before he spoke. "You all know why you're here," he said. No one interrupted. Even Krell, with his thin-lipped protest always on standby, held his tongue. "The document you are all interested in is here," Wolfe continued, tapping the envelope lightly with one forefinger. "Its presence is not a negotiation, nor a concession. It is a statement. I hold it. You do not." Krell shifted. "Mr. Wolfe." Wolfe held up a hand. "Not high, not fast, but firm. You will speak when spoken to, Mr. Krell. That applies to all of you." Wolfe looked to Lamb. "You've gone to considerable effort to orchestrate this. Surveillance, provocation, a whisper campaign to prompt Miss Stone's involvement, and most recently, a threat by implication, murder as encouragement." Lamb didn't flinch. "I encouraged nothing. The man in Brussels was a recipient of a copy," Wolfe said flatly. "We know." He turned to Sibylla. "You, Miss Stone, were chosen. Your inheritance made you valuable. Your ignorance made you safe until you weren't. Someone placed Lamb beneath your feet, not to find the document, but to see if you had it already. When you did not react as they hoped, they planted a sliver of Trigg's name and waited. You did what they gambled you would. You came to me." Sibylla spoke softly. "So they wanted me to bring it here?" "Yes," Wolfe said, "because they believed I would either unearth it or destroy it. Either outcome removed you from the equation." "Clever," Lamb said, "but wrong." Wolfe turned on him like a glacier shifts. "You miscalculated." Lamb raised an eyebrow. "Have I? You thought I would fear the pressure, that I would yield to implication. But this is no longer a matter of possession. It is a matter of ethics. The file contains not only details of financial malfeasance but deliberate cover-ups, some governmental, some criminal, some both. The information has value, yes, but more than that, it has weight." Krell opened his mouth again. "Mr. Wolfe, with all due respect, this is a classified—" "This," Wolfe said, "is no longer classified. It was once. But the moment it became a pawn in a private intelligence operation, the seal broke. You do not seek to protect national security, Mr. Krell. You seek to protect institutional embarrassment." That stung. Krell's mouth flattened into a taut line, but he didn't deny it. Lamb said, "So what do you propose? Broadcast it? Leak it? You'll be buried before it hits the wire." Wolfe gave him a long, slow look. "No, I do not act in haste. I act in judgment." He turned back to Sibylla. "Miss Stone, the decision is yours." She blinked. "Mine?" "You inherited the fragment. You drew me into this. I have performed my function. Now you must perform yours." Krell leaned forward. "Mrs. Stone, I urge you to think carefully about what you—" She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on Wolfe. "What happens if I release it? You risk exposure, lawsuits, harassment, worse. And if I don't, you remain a target. Always watched, always calculated." Sibylla looked down at her hands. "My father never told me what he'd done. But he left this. He must have known it would come back. Wolfe didn't speak. He waited. Sibella stood, slowly, and turned to Krell. "I'll release it," she said, "through my own channels, not yours, not Wolfe's. I'll issue it to the press. Anonymous if I can. Otherwise, so be it." Krell looked like he'd swallowed a razor blade. "That's a mistake." "No," Wolfe said, "it is not. It is a resolution, and for once, it did not come from me." He tapped the envelope again. "I will retain a copy. For insurance." Lamb smiled faintly. "You trust me that little. I trust you precisely, as far as I can predict your next move, and unfortunately for you I already have." Lamb stood. "Well then, my work here is done." Wolfe nodded. "Yes, you failed." That was the moment, I think, that Lamb realized it was over. Not just the game but the control. Wolfe had taken it back, and Sibella had claimed her part of the equation. Krell stood too, his face a diplomatic mask. "This isn't over." "No," Wolfe said, "but for once it will end properly." He gestured to the door. "Gentlemen." They left one after the other. Lamb, graceful, Krell stiff, Sibella lingered. "Thank you," she said quietly. Wolfe merely inclined his head. When the door closed behind her, Wolfe sighed. A long, slow post-battle exhalation. "You still have the copy?" I asked. He reached into the drawer, removed another envelope, identical, unmarked, and handed it to me. "Burn it," he said. I paused. "You sure?" "Yes. We have made our point. The rest belongs to the world." I left to carry out the order. When I came back, Fritz was waiting with dinner. Roast guinea fowl with apricots and pistachios. Wolfe was already seated. He took one bite and made a low, approving noise. "Justice," he murmured, "is best served with a white burgundy." I raised my glass. "And a whisper behind the curtain?" "Ah," Wolfe said. "That is merely the prelude." And with that we ate in peace. Dinner that night was as quiet as the brownstone ever gets. No phone calls, no doorbell, no footsteps pacing above us. Wolfe savored every bite of Fritz's guinea fowl, his silence not brooding but satisfied. The sort of silence that comes after a storm, when the branches are still but the air still tastes of rain. I poured myself a second glass of wine and watched him from across the table. No notes, no dictation, no criticism of the garnish. For Wolfe, that amounted to a state of near euphoria. He had not only solved a mystery, he had managed to outmaneuver a man designed to be uncatchable and protect a client who hadn't known she was a target. And perhaps, more importantly for Wolfe's personal sensibilities, he had done it all without leaving his chair. "You know," I said, swirling my wine, "you were right about her. Sibella. She wasn't bait. She was the fuse." "She still is," Wolfe said, without looking up. "That kind of fuse does not stop burning once lit." "Worried?" "No. She will release the fragment carefully. She is intelligent and angry. That is a dangerous combination, but not a reckless one. And Lamb, a ghost," he said. "He will vanish, as he was designed to, but not without remembering that his string was pulled. And Krell, a bureaucrat. He will file a report, somewhere between mildly dissatisfied and potential internal threat. It will die on a desk in an office without windows." I grinned. "Then what's left for us?" He glanced at me with mild annoyance. "Dinner, digestion, sleep." I let it hang for a moment before I said, "You ever wonder why they brought it here? Out of all the private detectives, federal channels, burned lawyers and academic stooges in New York, why us?" He wiped his mouth with his napkin. "Because they knew I would not move. That's why they'd avoid you. No, that's why they chose me. Movement, Mr. Goodwin, is unpredictable. Stillness is dependable. If you want something revealed, you bring it to the most immovable mind you can find and wait." I nodded, impressed, despite myself. You're saying they wanted the file found, but not by someone who would chase or panic or bargain. Exactly. They needed containment. I am a vessel with a valve. And he added, I do not leak. That was his version of modesty. After dinner, I did a final check of the brownstone. Nothing out of place. No tail cars parked down the block. The old man across the street was watering his tomato plants. And the only noise from Sabella's guest room upstairs was the soft scrape of paper turning. She was writing something. Maybe her statement. Maybe something for herself. Either way, she was calm now. Contained, like Wolfe said. I came back into the office to find Wolfe staring at the orchid display, with the kind of intent you'd reserve for reading Braille with your eyes. He didn't turn when I entered. She reminds me of Lily Rowan, he said. I blinked. Sabella, confident, decisive, capable of navigating ambiguity without surrendering to it. High praise. Observation. Praise implies affection. I feel none. Still, he shrugged. She will be fine. I took the red chair. So this is it. No loose ends. Wolfe didn't answer immediately. He reached instead for the envelope drawer, opened it and withdrew a small, square photograph, one I hadn't seen before. It was another surveillance shot. This time not of Wolfe, not of Sabella. It was me, taken from across 35th Street, exiting the brownstone 2 nights ago. I leaned forward. You didn't show me this. No. Why not? Because it did not matter. Not then. And now. He set the photo down. Now, it serves as a reminder. Of what? That we are never truly unwatched. And that those who try to vanish tend to leave traces in the lives of those they observe. You think Lamb left that for you? I think Wolfe said that he wanted me to know the score was not settled, that there are more fragments, more whispers. But this chapter is closed. I sat back. So he's not done. No. But he is for now defeated. And aware of it. Silence returned to the room. Thick and warm. I didn't break it. The next morning Sabella came down early, dressed in navy and looking 10 years older in the right way. She had a folder tucked under one arm and a determined look in her eyes. I'm heading out, she said. I'll call from a public line later. Wolfe nodded. Be precise, but not brave. She gave him a faint smile. I'm not the hero here. He raised an eyebrow. No. But you are the survivor. She turned to me. Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. You're welcome, Miss Stone. And if you get followed, don't wave. That's how they know it's you. She laughed. Then she left. I went into the office and found Wolfe already reading a new book. Something about constitutional fragility. His idea of light fare. He didn't look up. I said, That's the end of it then. No, Wolfe murmured. That is only the end of their beginning. I stood in the doorway for a moment longer. The morning sun was coming in over his shoulder, falling across the desk like a warm fingerprint. The orchid buds behind him glowed faintly. Breakfast? I asked. In 10 minutes. I left him to his thoughts, knowing he'd probably already put this case into his private mental archive, complete with cross-references and moral classification. Wolfe wouldn't call it justice. He wouldn't even call it victory. But somewhere, in the structure of his inner order, a small imbalance had been corrected. Upstairs, I heard the faint click of the front door. Sabella was gone. Outside, the city churned. People moved. Secrets shifted hands. Whispers became headlines. And somewhere behind a different curtain, another man waited for the next fuse to light. But inside the brownstone, the world had returned to silence, and Nero Wolfe, seated, still, untouched, remained the man who never moved, but always sought. The quiet didn't last. That's how it goes in the brownstone. We get a few hours of peace, a long lunch. Wolfe complains about the parsley. And just when I think the world might let us digest, someone throws a pebble into the pond. This time, the pebble came in the form of a manila envelope. It was waiting for me when I stepped out to check the mail the next morning. No return address, No stamp, hand-delivered, the kind of thing that made my fingers itch even before I tore it open. I carried it in like it might leak acid, closed the front door and brought it into the office where Wolfe was finishing his beer. He glanced up when I entered. Junk mail. If junk mail now comes with high-grade mystery attached. Yes. I dropped the envelope on his desk. Wolfe scowled, opened the flap, and slid out the contents with the delicacy of a man unwrapping a rare cheese. Inside, one photograph, one USB flash drive, and a note written on hotel stationery. The photo showed a man in a cafe. European, judging by the chairs and tiled sidewalk. His face was in profile, but the resemblance was enough. Leopold Trigg. The date scrolled in red marker along the bottom edge read, 2 months ago. I whistled low. That's not possible. Wolfe said nothing. He picked up the note, read it once, then handed it to me. It read, "Nothing stays buried forever. You heard a whisper. Are you ready for the scream?" No signature, just the hotel name, Hotel Mühlbach, Zurich. Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. A final ripple. You think the photo's real? I think someone wants us to think it is. I picked up the USB and turned it over in my palm. It was generic, black, plastic, and about as trustworthy as a man who says he'll circle back. You want me to check it? I asked. Wolfe gave me a look. On a dedicated, isolated terminal. Of course. Wolfe doesn't even trust Fritz's meat grinder near a phone line. I went down to the basement, where we kept our forensic laptop, never connected to the internet, stripped of wireless cards, and used solely for reading things that might explode electronically. I plugged in the drive and waited. One file. An audio recording. No title. I hit play. Static. For 5 seconds. Then a voice. Male. Horse. This is Trigg. If this reaches you, the Finch wasn't enough. I'm sorry. I sat up straight. I did what I had to do. I faked my death. But I wasn't the only one with access. They're coming for the rest. The birds weren't all named. The documents go deeper. Stone's daughter, Sibella, may hold the key. She's the one they never expected to wake up. The audio clicked off. I sat back. Dead men didn't leave recordings. Not unless they knew they'd be found. I brought the drive back upstairs, set it on Wolfe's desk, and repeated the contents word for word. Wolfe didn't move. Someone is playing a deeper game, he said. Either Trigg is alive, or someone wants us to act as if he is. You think the voice was faked? No, too exact, too weary. It's him. I whistled again. So what now? Trigg's alive, Lamb's in hiding, and Sibella's supposed to be the next clue. She already was, Wolfe said. And now she may be in danger again. I picked up the phone to call her. No answer. Wolfe watched me hang up with a frown. She would not leave without telling us. I nodded. Want me to check her apartment? No. Have Fred do it. You go to the hotel. I blinked. Zurich? No. The Mühlbach in Manhattan. The stationery was from the one in Zurich. Yes, but no international courier delivers anonymously in 6 hours. That envelope came from here. It was sound logic. I called Fred and gave him the order. Wolfe dialed Saul. I was in the cab to Midtown within 15 minutes, tracing the address from the notehead. The Hotel Mühlbach sat tucked between 2 larger buildings on a narrow side street near East 58th. The lobby had been recently redecorated in a way that said someone watched too many Scandinavian thrillers, lots of blonde wood, and indirect lighting. The desk clerk looked up when I gave the room number on the envelope. Checked out this morning, she said. Left anything behind? She hesitated. Are you family? No, I said. I'm the guy who's supposed to pick up the rest of the whisper. She blinked, then nodded, and handed me a small black envelope from the whole drawer. Back at the brownstone, I opened it in Wolfe's office. Inside was a key. A real one. Old brass, numbered 319, and a note written in the same handwriting as before. You've opened a curtain. Time to step backstage. Wolfe stared at the key. I know that number. You do? 319. The floor plan is from a corporate safe house in the West. 40s. The building was decommissioned 6 years ago. I remember reading about it during a Senate inquiry, one of the shell locations from Project Can. I stared at the key like it might start speaking. They're leading us there. No, Wolfe said. They're inviting us. And you want to RSVP? I want to know who still has a ticket. We made the decision fast. Fred would check Sabella's apartment and tail any unusual movement. Saul would watch Lamb's usual haunts. Ori would canvass the building the key belonged to. I was to go inside. Wolfe didn't like it, but he said it anyway. You are the right bait. I'd prefer a promotion. You've already been promoted. You now have an even chance of being killed for state secrets. Lucky me. At 6 that evening, I entered a building that hadn't been labeled since the Bush administration. Inside was dust, silence, and a vague sense that someone had swept too recently for a place that claimed to be abandoned. The elevator didn't work. I took the stairs, 3rd floor, door 319. The key fit. Inside was a single room. No windows, a cot, a desk, a tape recorder, and a file folder marked Blue Finch. Final addendum. I picked it up and leafed through. It was deeper than we thought. Projector links to allied nations, bank accounts tied to development aid that led to personal offshores. This wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was thunder. Then came the voice. Not from the recorder, from behind me. You're early. I turned, and there stood Sabella. Alive, calm, dressed in black. You left, I said. No. I moved forward. Wolfe would have told you if you hadn't gone chasing ghosts. You left without warning. I had to. There are things I had to do, people I had to meet. You weren't the only one watching. My brain caught up. This was your play. No, she said. This was Trigg's play. I just stepped into the final act. I held up the file. Is this the scream? She nodded. And behind her, in the shadowed hallway, someone else stepped forward. An older man. Gaunt. Familiar. Leopold Trigg. Alive. He said nothing. Just met my eyes with a tired nod. Wolfe had been right. Again. But this time, the whisper had become a voice. And the voice had come home. I stood in the center of room 39 with a folder full of state secrets in one hand, and a dead man breathing in front of me. Sabella stood to my left, calm as stone, and Leopold Trigg, very much alive, stood beneath a dangling light bulb like a ghost that had decided haunting was too passive. No one spoke for a moment. Trigg's eyes were sunken, his frame thinner than any photograph I'd seen. But he wasn't frail. His movements had intent. He looked like a man who'd spent 10 years running and had only just realized he was allowed to stop. You're Goodwin, he said finally. His voice was hoarse but direct. Wolfe sent you. He did, I said. But let's be clear. I didn't expect to find a resurrection when I opened the door. Trigg nodded, like he'd heard that line in his head a dozen times already. I stayed dead, he said. Because I had to. The Finch was just the beginning. If I'd surfaced too early, they would have buried everyone who'd ever touched the files before anyone knew they mattered. Sabella stepped closer. We thought you were trying to protect the file, but you were protecting yourself. Both, he said. And her. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at Sabella. My father was a good man, she said softly. Not moving. But he never warned me what you were doing, or why I was connected to it. I couldn't, he said, not without putting you in play. As long as you were just a footnote, a daughter of a co-founder, you had distance. Then the others started dying. I knew someone would come for you eventually. Lamb, I said. Trigg nodded. He's not alone. There's a faction that wants to erase Cairn. Not just the files, the memory. They've already removed the European copies. I left fragments in 4 cities, Only 2 are still standing. I held up the final addendum folder. And this? His eyes flicked to it. That's everything. What remains of Project Cairn? The real version. Not the sanitized brief Krell's office has on record. I had a dozen questions and no time to ask them. So why now? I said. Why show yourself? Because the whisper became a scream, he said. And I heard it. Wolfe was the only man I trusted not to chase it down. That's why I left Sabella the paper, the curtain, the scent of the trail. I knew he'd bring the right kind of pressure, measured, observant, unrelenting. Flattering, I said. But you also made her a target. I made her a player, he said. There's a difference. Sabella finally broke her silence. What do you want us to do with this? She asked. I want it to live, he said. Not just leak and vanish, but breathe. Documented, tracked, echoed. Quietly if possible, loudly if necessary. You're handing it to Wolfe? I asked. Yes. Trigg said. Because he'll keep it safe. Not hide it. Not bury it. Keep it. As leverage. As evidence. He took a long breath, like it had cost him everything to get to this room and he had just enough breath left to make it count. I'm not long for this anyway. The lungs, they're not what they were. I have months. Maybe. And I'd rather the finch sing than go back in a cage. He extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm, grounded in a decade of running and regret. Then I took Sabella's elbow and said, Come on, let's go tell Wolfe his ghost wants a word. We left Trigg in room 3-9, envelope in hand, the lights dimming behind him. Saul would be watching the building. Fred would make sure no one else went in or out. And Wolfe would be waiting, surrounded by orchids and order, ready to pass judgment on a man who'd faked his own death and weaponized a daughter's inheritance. Back at the brownstone, I opened the door and led Sabella inside. Wolfe was in his chair, not reading, not eating. Waiting. She has it, I said. Sabella stepped forward, handed him the folder. And Trigg? Wolfe asked. Alive. For now. Wolfe opened the folder, scanned the first page, then closed it. I see, he said. So the curtain was only ever meant to draw us to the stage. Sabella said, He wants you to keep it. Use it if needed. Make sure it's never lost again. Wolfe nodded once. That is acceptable. I raised an eyebrow. Just like that. There is nothing left to prove, Mr. Goodwin. Only things to protect. He has already lost everything else. Sabella sat. She looked exhausted, but there was something steadier in her now. The fuse had burned through, but the detonation had forged something, not destroyed it. He asked me if I believed the truth would matter, she said softly. I didn't know how to answer. Truth matters, Wolfe said. But not always immediately. Sometimes it must wait for the world to be ready. She nodded. And if the world never is, then it becomes memory. And memory is a different kind of justice. No one spoke after that. The folder went into Wolfe's wall safe, behind a panel that hadn't been opened in years. Not because it was hidden, but because Wolfe knew the difference between safe and buried. Sabella stayed for another night. The next morning she left quietly, without breakfast. Wolfe didn't ask where she was going. I didn't either. Somewhere quiet, I assumed. Somewhere without curtains. By noon, we had resumed our usual rhythm. Fritz was experimenting with a new mushroom reduction. Wolfe rejected it. I approved it. The world was back on its axis, or pretending to be. But we both knew the whisper hadn't stopped. It had simply passed on. Passed through us. The next knock at the door could come tomorrow, or 10 years from now. And when it did, Wolfe would be seated, still, listen. Because that's the thing about Nero Wolfe. He doesn't chase the noise. He waits for it. And when it comes, whisper, scream, or something in between, he is always ready. 3 days passed. 3 unusually quiet, uninterrupted days in the brownstone, an unnatural stretch of calm. Wolfe both relished and mistrusted. No visitors, no surveillance. No manila envelope slid under the door like breadcrumbs for the damned. Fritz returned to experimenting with wine reductions. Wolfe returned to orchids, books, and sighing deeply whenever I entered the room with a newspaper. Me, I paced. You don't go from finding a presumed dead whistleblower alive in a forgotten midtown safe house to sitting on your hands over scrambled eggs without your instincts buzzing like a kicked beehive. But Wolfe was content to let the embers cool, and when Nero Wolfe decides the temperature has dropped, you'd better not strike a match without permission. It was late afternoon, halfway between Wolfe's fourth beer and dinner prep, when the final piece clicked into place. He was reading a bound volume of Cicero's letters and sipping slowly. I was reorganizing the case file from our safe. Yes, the blue finch one, not that we labeled it, and came across something small, something I'd seen 3 times already and dismissed each time. A line in Trigg's voice recording. A throwaway phrase. The birds weren't all named. I stopped. Wolfe. He looked up. You said the finch was a code. But Trigg kept saying the birds weren't all named. Yes. Well, what if he wasn't being metaphorical? What if Blue Finch was just one of several files? Maybe the others weren't given labels or weren't named yet because they hadn't been found. Wolfe sat very still. Archie, he said slowly, what is the purpose of naming something? To identify it. More. To control it. Exactly. Naming confers control. Trigg named Blue Finch because it was the most dangerous and the most likely to escape. The others he left unnamed, to remain buried until someone with enough sense or reason found them. Or until someone like Sibella did. He nodded. Which is why Lamb never asked her for a location, only watched. He believed the finch would lead to the rest, and now, we know it would. I straightened up. You said this was over. It is. For now. But the revelation is not an ending. It is a warning. That evening the phone rang. Wolfe, let me answer it. It was Sibella. I wanted to say thank you, she said. Trigg has given his statement to an intermediary. The file's being published next week, quietly. The way he wanted. He left the country last night, permanently. I think so. He didn't say where, but he said the curtain's closed and it's someone else's stage now. She paused. Tell Wolfe I'm not afraid anymore. I passed that along. Wolfe made a non-committal sound, somewhere between a grunt and the world's smallest nod. That night, over lemon risotto and grilled asparagus, Wolfe delivered the final word. Not loud, not poetic, but pure Wolfe. Justice, he said, is not always a hammer. Sometimes it is a presence, persistent, silent, unmoved, until it is time to speak. I raised my glass. To the man who speaks only when the world refuses to listen. No, Wolfe said. To the woman who listened when the world refused to speak. We ate in peace, and somewhere out there, the whispers faded. Not because they were silenced, but because they had been heard. Because they had been heard. Because